Hi, everybody. I am so excited to be here today. My name is Sunny Strasburg. Welcome to the K-Dome, the Infinite Playa. I am a psychotherapist. I specialize in psychedelic assisted therapy and Jungian archetypal psychology, and I offer ketamine assisted therapy in my practice in Salt Lake. I've recently started a nonprofit organization with Phil Wolfson called the Indra's Net Coalition. And I have been practicing magic for a long, long time. So that brought me my interest to my guest today, who is Mitch Horowitz. He is a historian of alternative spirituality and one of today's most literate voices in esoterica, mysticism, and the occult. He has written many great books and articles, including Occult America and the Miracle Club, which I loved very much. He's been on several podcasts with Duncan Trussell, which are amazing. His latest book, The Miracle Habits, The Secret of Turning Your Moments into Miracles, is a book in which Mitch shows how to foster a life of revolutionary self-direction through 13 miracle habits. I think my favorite thing that I've heard about you is Duncan Trussell saying that you're the perfect blend of Alan Watts and Aleister Crowley. It's so perfect for you. So welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here. We have the same rug. I'm delighted looking at your rug, and although your viewers can't see it, I have the identical rug beneath my feet.
So, that's amazing.
Yeah.
This rug is like a magic carpet. I've had so many people tell me this.
It must be. It's extended here, so I couldn't help but
carpet
notice.
With a K.
Yeah, right.
So I have so many things I want to talk to you about today. Your mind, your thoughts about things have inspired me. And I'm like, I get you for an hour to ask you all the questions I want. I'm really interested, because I'm a psychedelic assisted therapy, I'm really interested in this idea that you offered in a couple of the podcasts I've heard about this hypnagogic state between sleeping and awake, and how that's a really potential time for us to ask for what we want. And you call it selecting your reality, which is incredible, right? So my curiosity is, when we're in those hypnagogic states, what happens is our frontal lobes become quiet. And so those managers that are running the show all day get more quiet, and our creative mind, other parts of our psyche, are able to run the show. And in the psychedelic space, that's exactly what happens. The default network gets shut down, and we're more open. So my question for you is, do you think that there's a potential in psychedelic spaces to really practice magic and this idea of pulling our reality to us, creating our reality?
Well, I think that what you were just describing neurologically is very interesting, because people experience it as a lowering of their rational defenses. And that's why states in which there's that frontal lobe relaxation, whether it's induced by hypnagogia or psychedelics or something else, can be so valuable, because our forebears in the world of self-development, self-help, practical magic, have all wrestled with the question of how to suggest things to ourselves, how to engage in what used to be called self-hypnosis or suggestibility or conscious autosuggestion, because the rational mind will reject things of which it's unpersuaded, including sometimes things that may represent very positive ideals, things that we wish to bring into our lives, but that we're unable to persuade ourselves from, because there's this so-called rational traffic cop, which might be called the frontal lobe, who is disrupting the entry and the acceptance of these positive self-suggestions. That same rational traffic cop also helps us sometimes. He or she may be rejecting the entry of some very harmful suggestions that would be deleterious to our experience. But the question is, how do we select which suggestions we wish to allow in? And I feel it's been my experience that hypnagogia can just be hugely helpful with that, because we enter it naturally twice a day, just as we're going to sleep at night and just as we're coming to in the morning, which some people call hypnopompia, but it's a similar state. And it's a state in which we experience all this Salvador Dali-esque imagery. We may experience noises or dreamlike images or hallucinations or what have you, but whatever it is, we do retain some control over cognition, and we're able to use that control to introduce ideas to ourselves. So it's a profoundly valuable state. And it seems to me that it's the closest thing we have to a holy grail, so to speak, of self-suggestibility. So I use it twice a day, almost every day, without exception.
I appreciate that. It's interesting in the psychedelic world. Ketamine assisted psychotherapy, which is really, coming, to the forefront right now in therapy. Um, it's a really interesting medicine because it certain doses, it's all dose dependent for how intense it is. But at certain doses, your conscious mind is able to stay aware, but it's not like that traffic cop that you're talking about. It's more like this highest, most embodied self.
Hmm.
And we can reorient to that throughout the entire psychedelic experiences. Whereas with other psychedelics, they're so powerful in the visuals or the ride that you're on that you forget where you are and you forget your intention. But something that's really amazing about ketamine, if you get the right dose, is that people are able to just keep reorienting to that highest self and keep calling that intention over and over and over again for an hour and a half, instead of
Hmm.
maybe the 15 minutes that we have in a hypnagogic state,
Yes.
falling asleep or waking up, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I haven't experimented with ketamine. I have with microdosing, and I'm eager to try ketamine. I feel like psychedelics, as we were talking about before the camera went on, they probably represent a chapter to come in my own search.
Well, you're welcome to come to Salt Lake for an exciting adventure.
Right on. Okay.
Do you have any other times during the day other than those sleep and awake states where you practice this idea of calling in this intention?
Well, sometimes I'll purposefully induce those states, either by going into meditative states or, frankly, going into a napping or dreamlike state. And I find any state in which the body is exquisitely relaxed and you're hovering in between sleep and wakefulness, it's basically a hypnagogic state. You're basically getting that frontal lobe relaxation. You are experiencing just an exquisite openness, to put it in figurative terms, a bodily relaxation. And I'll induce that usually at least 1 or 2 times during the waking day.
Nice. Okay. I think about that in magic practice as well. So what about emotion? How important is it to engage your emotions in these moments? Does that help potentiate the
I,
magic?
I believe it does, and it's absolutely critical. Although my critique is that I think the New Thought world, the positive mind world, which is a very important part of my life, which is a background that I come out of myself, I think sometimes within that world, there's so great an emphasis on emotion, on getting your emotions on your side, on living from the emotional state of your desire fulfilled, that it can become an obstruction. And I've gone searching for alternative methods, not because I disagree with the idea that entering into and capturing the flavor of an emotional state is profoundly important to what I would call selectivity, but it's not always possible. Sometimes people are suffering from grief, depression, anxiety, chronic stress. My demon, what I wrestle with, is anxiety. I don't think I've ever been depressed a day in my life, but I do experience anxiety. And unless a person experiences these states in a chronic way, it's hard to feel the sympathy for what somebody goes through. So, for example, although I don't experience depression, the fact that I wrestle with anxiety helps me feel empathy for the person who does experience depression, because it comes upon you like a weather system, and it does feel hardwired into your body, and it may very well be hardwired into your body. And the trouble is, when we go through these difficult emotional states, we start to rationalize them and ask, why am I feeling this? Whereas there may be no reason why per se. It may just be that it may just be a matter of your brain biology. That just may be the way you're built. And after the fact, selecting reasons why we feel that way can almost deepen the hold that these states have on us, because we become persuaded that there's some outside reason. There may not be an outside reason. It's because of all this that I feel we can't just marry the idea of positive mind metaphysics or mental selectivity to an attainment of the emotional state, because it's not always possible. So, for example, I write about a practice which I call the 10-day miracle challenge, and it has to do with consciously focusing on a cherished goal or aim for a period of 10 days. And during that period of 10 days, anything goes. You can pray in whatever fashion you use. You can visualize, you can affirm, you can meditate, you can use hypnagogy, you can use psychedelics, you can use emotionally based feeling state meditations that bring you into the state of having received, or you can do any number of other things. I don't believe, and this is a major area of inquiry for me right now in my own search, I don't believe that we are unable to enter and attain magical states or supple states of mind through extra rational processes alone. I think that the rational mind can also be used as a tool of selection, and I'm identifying with that, and I'm working with that, I'm experimenting with that. If we spend invariably some portion of our day within the rational state of mind, that kind of analytic, so-called right brain state of mind in which we're measuring things, calculating things, adding things up, balancing things, I want to probe the question in my own life, because I spend a lot of time in that place, whether I like it or not, whether that state too can allow me to access powers of perspective that I find in the more extra rational states, such as hypnagogia. I'm really interested. This question is very hot for me right now. I'm writing about it, and I'm in a place of experimenting with it.
Wow, super interesting. So you're talking about using your hyper logical mind for magic rather than the emotive affective state for magic.
Exactly.
Wow.
Not necessarily substituting one for the other, but using both, because sometimes I spend a lot of time within that rational mindset, and sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, you're too rational, you're too intellectual, you're too wrapped up in this rational mindset, and so on and so forth. And I've asked myself, okay, they may be capturing correctly an aspect of my character, but is that necessarily a barrier? Do I know that that's a barrier? We have to be really careful on the path, I think, to verify things, because so many people want to tell us, this is how it's done. It has to be this way. Or, I remember years ago, a senior colleague in an esoteric study group saying to me, there are no shortcuts. And I thought to myself, well, you're probably right, but I don't know that you're right. I don't absolutely know that you're correct. Why would I take that for granted? And so when you hear people say, you have to first know yourself before you can know God, as somebody was insisting to me recently on Twitter, I thought to myself, how do I know that that's true? How do I know that that's true? The burning bush could come in any number of ways, shortcuts. There are no shortcuts. Yeah, it sounds true because we repeat it so frequently, but I don't know that. The rational mind is a barrier to magic. It sounds true, but I don't know that that's true. And I want to take a hammer to these things and say, wait a minute, I'm not accepting them. I'm going to experiment with them.
I love that. There's so much there that I want to unpack. I'm thinking, as you're talking about the rational mind versus the emotional mind, the Jungian idea of the hieros gamos, or conuncio, the masculine and feminine. Like,
Yes,
why, like the rational
put.
mind as the masculine or father sky, and then the feminine as mother earth, right? And why does it have to be? I mean, we're so monotheistic in our culture. We tend to think there's one answer for everything.
That's
right.
It. Yeah.
So could we have a polyvalent experience where it could be through the rational mind, it could be through emotion, it could be through time travel, who knows, right? It could be a lot of ways.
and I think you've hit upon a wonderful point. It's a huge intellectual blind spot in our culture, in Western culture in general, to assume that there's one grand cause behind everything. So if somebody's suffering from a trauma, for example, they can get obsessed with finding that one turnkey that's going to explain to them why they're this way. And the truth is, there may be a complexity of reasons why. Problems are often multifaceted. Their causes may be multifaceted, but we get so obsessed with the idea that there's this one pinpointed answer. Likewise, people who view life from a more materialistic perspective will get very obsessed with that. You talk to them about the placebo response, for example, and they'll say it's nothing but the release of endorphins. And My challenge to them is, because we've identified one truth, that doesn't mean it's the exclusive truth. There could be a dozen different things going on in the placebo effect. The placebo response, in some regards, it's what the spiritual appeal, what the religious appeal, what the mental appeal looks like in the body. And one of those things that it looks like may very well be the release of endorphins. And that's helpful to know. But that doesn't tell us that there aren't a dozen other things going on. So just because we found one thing that seems to be true doesn't mean there's nothing else that's true also going on. So I always ask people, if you find an insight, that's wonderful. But don't let that insight close you off to the possibility that there's other things going on, and there may be something very relevant going on, for your neighbor who hasn't had that insight, but who still is experiencing things that are useful. And don't assume that if you're experiencing a problem in life, there's just this one golden answer to be unlocked to that problem. It could be a complexity of things.
I love that. I'm thinking about science and how what you pay attention to, what you're looking for, eliminates all of this other information that's coming in, because what can you measure? What do you pay attention to, right? And so science is great, but it can become dogmatic if you think that that's all there is. It's almost like a religion in and of itself. If you say this is the answer, it's never going to change. One of the underpinnings of real science is that you're always open to more information and changing your hypothesis, right?
Yes.
And so it's like, as more things come into our consciousness, then we broaden our scope, right? And we're able to see more.
Absolutely. And that is a pitfall of human nature that we all have to watch out for. There's so many of us within the alternative spiritual culture who may be fleeing more orthodox religions from our youth. And I would say, let us all be careful that we don't recreate those more orthodox religions within our own culture, because you'll hear people insist that the only means of effective prayer is to pray with the feeling that you already have received that which you want. And my contention is, well, I know the passage of scripture that you're getting that from, and I honor it. But if you're going to be scripturally based, there's a lot of different forms of prayer in scripture, including the patriarchs and matriarchs getting angry with God, arguing back with God, maybe praying to someone else. There could be any number of variants to prayer. And I just want us to be really careful about not devolving into a kind of catechism within our own spiritual culture. Likewise, I'll say to the skeptics and the critics, who I try to dialogue with whenever there's a constructive possibility, if you use terms like confirmation bias, it's just a fancy way of saying prejudice. And we all walk around with prejudices, and we all want to see our own perspective replicated in the world around us. It seems to make us feel more secure. The skeptic, him or herself, has to take that same medicine, because they have their own retinue of prejudices. We all do. And we all want to see them replicated. So we're all walking around with these potential blind spots, and we just have to take them into account.
I love that. Okay, so this leads to this big question that I have, and you're kind of pointing here. As I'm listening, especially to Infinite Potential, the Neville Goddard book that you wonderfully narrate on Audible. I enjoyed that.
I have him tattooed right here, actually.
So I'm thinking about this idea of, in psychology, we have this thing called internal versus external locus of control. I'm thinking about this. In psychedelic spaces, I often leave wondering, was that just a huge extrapolation of my internal psyche? Or am I tapping into some external reality out here that exists regardless of me, that I'm being shown? Okay, right. So another way of saying this is in Magick, do we absolutely create our own reality? And there's no reality out there. It's totally solipsistic, emanating from itself. Or is there a reality outside of us that we engage with? And I just want to hear your thoughts about this, because so many things I've listened to with Neville Goddard, et cetera, is like, it's kind of like saying that it's all existing within.
Yeah, it's a really heavy question. And I love Neville. Neville has been probably the greatest influence in my life. But that doesn't mean that I necessarily follow Neville according to every stricture statement and framing of things. Neville would very often say that if you imagine God and you in your mind's eye see something or fathom something that's outside yourself, you have missed the mark. It's all within you. It's all within you. And I reject that for the following reason. I feel, first of all, that there are times, and we were alluding to this earlier, where people are in a real state of emotional anguish. They may be suffering from addiction, for example, and they are pushed to their knees. There are times in life where it's impossible for the individual to enter into a kind of feeling state of his or her wish fulfilled because the person is suffering. I don't think Mother Nature has played some sort of a cruel joke on us whereby we're incapable of selecting a new state of reality, a new state of experience when we are in anguish. That would be a cruel cosmic limitation to find ourselves under. Hence, I think that the mind, when it's in anguish, or the rational mind, or other states of mind, can be used and should be experimented with as tools of selectivity. And even if intellect, even if mind is the ultimate arbiter of reality, and I believe it is, even if that's the case, I don't see how that necessarily contradicts the use of prayer as a method, even if I locate the source that I'm petitioning outside myself. Call it a device, call it a device. Furthermore, I don't know that the source to whom I'm praying is not located outside myself. I pray all the time to a source that you might ostensibly say is outside myself. And I'm very aware that I have colleagues on the path who would say, you've missed the mark, but we don't know that. I don't know that. I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish background, and I grew up with the standard Jewish perspective on God, which is that, we all know it, that, it's this kind of figure outside of ourselves to whom we can petition, or who might get angry at us, or who might give us goodies when we're good. And it's easy to make fun of that as a kind of a more exoteric or more mainstream or even childish, view of the divine. And I have noticed in myself, even though that's not my framework anymore at this point in my life, I've moved on from that a long time ago. At the same time, I still catch myself thinking within that framework. And I'm asking myself at this point in my search, rather than treat that as some throwback to childhood, rather than treat that as some pattern that's outmoded, that has gotten internalized by me, at least consider that it may be true. I don't know that it's not true. My allegiances are different today, but I don't know that that paradigm is not true. Our ancient ancestors personified energies, let's say, and they gave these energies names like Jupiter or Minerva or Set, and they petitioned these energies. They sought relationships with these energies. I am not prepared to say that my Egyptian and Persian and Roman and Greek and Babylonian ancestors were just confused. They just had it all wrong. I'm not prepared to say that. These civilizations existed for thousands of years, and that was their mode of worship. So I take that very seriously, and I experiment with that, because I don't think that, I do believe that everything converges on mind. At the same time, I'm very far away from that perspective sometimes, and I don't know that there isn't an aspect of life in which I'm addressing something that, at least in terms of my perspective, exists outside me, in the same way that I'm addressing you right now as another individual, in the same way that we're interacting with your viewers as other individuals. I don't know that paradigm is wrong when it comes to probing the invisible.
That's fascinating. I'm thinking about our earlier conversation and how does it have to be either or? Why couldn't it be and both?
Of course.
Right. I mean, I was thinking about these, I had these two ketamine journeys where one, or a lot of them, I'm always searching for the divine, show me, teach me, I'm humble. I just want direction. Right. And recently I had this experience where that goddess that I was seeking actually was like riding around in me, and she was experiencing being a human, and all of a sudden our roles were reversed and I was teaching her something, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's this beautiful play, and Neville Goddard talks about that. You've talked about that, being God or goddess, right? Experiencing this reality, creating our reality, my will be done. I think that's such an
Yes,
interesting, an interesting take on it, right? So why couldn't it be both?
absolutely. I agree. I agree. I mean, I think ultimately, it is all one thing. You know, I talk often about there being, when people speak of inner, outer, personality, essence, attachment, non-attachment, material, immaterial, I think it's artifice. You know, I think we can almost feel ourselves torn in two sometimes if we get too hung up on the concept of there being this division between that which is spiritual in me and that which is material, or that which is egotistical and that which is essential. You know, a teacher of mine once joked that, you know, if we manifest something in our behavior, in our character, and we don't like it, we say that's personality, and if we like it, we say that's essence. And, you know, it can be kind of just an artificial trick that we play on ourselves. I mean, I don't know, I don't feel that those divisions are actual.
Well, I mean, we're like really fancy monkeys, basically, and I think
Yeah.
we have this amazing consciousness that rides around in these little monkey bodies, right? And so it's pretty hard to transcend the simian parts of us, right? Which are very, I mean, we have this like super ego, and then we have the id, right? We're constantly like going back between both of them. So how do you categorize these experiences?
How do you categorize them? And, you know, sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, okay, maybe they have a question about something in their lives. And very, very often, I mean, let's face facts, it's money or romance, you know, and sometimes they feel embarrassed and they're like, oh, you know, I wish I was talking to you about something else. And I'd say, look, never, never, never apologize for that. I mean, you know, work and relationships are most of what we do. You know, I mean, we like to talk about meaning and so forth, but much of our lives is dedicated to work and relationships. It seems to be the basic human activity. And so why should any of us feel embarrassed about that? So sometimes, you know, we're going through life and we're doing these things and they can be classified as ordinary, but they're profound because they're our lives, what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Um, okay, so I want to shift gears a little bit. And again, that Infinite Potential book was so impactful for me.
Oh,
I
glad to hear
loved,
that.
yeah, I loved this idea of the Old Testament being, I mean, it's told almost by Neville Goddard in your comment, almost like a Jungian archetypal symbolic, right?
Yeah.
Symbolic of the self, of God being this higher self. And again, psychedelic states are really like that too. It's like dream work where it's all couched in like these really ornate symbols, right? That we have to like unpack and integrate later. And I'm wondering why magic material is often presented in that way to us in dreams or in insights that we have. Why do you think it comes in that form?
That's really interesting. I mean, on one hand, I would say that it probably has to do with the need to, again, you know, kind of lower our rational states of mind. When our rational states of mind are lowered, things can enter that can be really illustrative of something very helpful, but also difficult things can enter too, you know, and that's one of the challenges of it. You know, everything is kind of a double-edged sword. People who suffer from grief, for example, maybe they've lost a loved one or they're wrestling with a deep uncertainty, they very often identify the wee early hours of the morning as the most difficult time of day. And I'm convinced that it's for the same reason that that same time of morning can also be a very helpful time of day, because again, the rational apparatus of the mind is relaxed and the psyche is allowed to run free, and it can run free in directions that are very positive and illuminating. It can also run free in directions that are very fearful and difficult. And so, you know, some people may have that same experience sometimes through psychedelics or other intoxicants. There are periods of great joy and a kind of uplift, and there are periods of suffering and difficulty. So we have to approach these things with great care. And I'm also, again, you know, one of my experiments right now is to ask the question of whether in my so-called rational mind, the mind that I'm using right now, you know, to put together some of these, to formulate some of these concepts into examples, maybe in that very state, maybe right now, all of us, you, me, everybody listening, maybe we're all selecting a multidimensional reality right now, just as we're speaking. And it feels very natural to us simply because when we have perspective on something, that perspective is necessarily accompanied by a sense of past, present, probable future. So if we were selecting at all times of day, which is something that I propose in the Miracle Club, if this was going on all the time and things were changing in the same way that the selection of anything brings with it a multi-dimensional perspective, it would all feel very natural. It wouldn't feel like, gee, I'm looking at life from this zigzagging car. It would feel like this is all completely natural, and I'm at ease with it. And so in our rational states of mind, that may be going on. And the question is, we don't see it because maybe it would be overwhelming. So we devise things like linear time, which we all know doesn't really exist. I mean, you know, Einstein's relativity theories, which have basically been proven, tell us that linear time doesn't exist. But it's a very necessary, very helpful illusion for so-called five sensory beings to navigate through life. So if we didn't have a sense of linear time, it could be overwhelming. You know, it could just be overwhelming. At the same time, allowing for that, it's possible that in these so-called rational states, we are selecting things all the time. And if we could bring awareness to that, see what grows out of that, see what perspective we're able to glean on that, it could be a very helpful experiment. So again, you know, that's something I'm working with.
Oh man, we're like so synced, because I was going to bring up a question for you about time travel and quantum physics. So
Okay.
perfect.
Yeah, yeah. It
Yay.
touches on that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So with my therapy clients, I do a lot of EMDR, which is a technique. It's non-psychedelic. It's a technique for trauma treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And also I use this in ketamine, where I encourage my clients, as they get healthier and they have this wise part of themselves that's an adult and safe in this moment. For example, in the psychedelic space, I will encourage them to set the intention that they're going to go back in time to where that little child part of them was being traumatized, and as their adult self show up in the space and rescue little child from the trauma and come back. And when they come back out of the space, we have this amazing, usually integration, where it was extremely helpful. It's almost like we went and jumped the timelines and pulled that part of themselves that got split off and stuck in time. We're actually rescuing that part and bringing it forward. It's really a powerful technique. And I was thinking about that on one of your podcasts with Duncan Trussell, where you were talking about, you know, as a child, you would fantasize about doing this right now. You'd be talking and being a
Honestly,
public figure, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so it's
yeah.
kind of like this chicken or egg thing. Like, did you go back in time and plant that into your little Mitch? Or did little Mitch call that reality to him, right?
That's such a fascinating question, because in terms of my perspective, you know, little Mitch always wanted to be on camera and in front of a microphone, and friends would be playing, you know, games, just, you know, games that kids play. And, you know, to be frank, when I was a kid, I don't know if it's changed, but, you know, when I was 4 years old, 5 years old, growing up in Queens, you know, we would play war games and cowboys and Indians, and that was things that boys did back then. It might be different today, but whatever the case is, I would pretend that I was on a movie set. And my own friends, I wouldn't disclose this to anybody, but my own friends were, I presume, you know, having their own fantasies. And it's so funny, because I was just doing a podcast with a couple of guys who are filmmakers, and one of them was making the point that every movie, drama or not, is really a documentary, because if it's a Western, let's say, the horse doesn't know it's in a movie. The horse is just doing its thing, being a horse. And the actors themselves, you know, well, ostensibly they know they're in a movie, but it's a study in acting. It's a study in thespianism and performance. It's a study in scenery. It's a study in, you know, how to control a pyrotechnic explosion or something like that. You know, whatever it is, in a certain sense, every movie is documentary. And that sort of blew my mind, because when I was a kid, you know, I was framing myself into a dramatic situation, which was, in a certain sense, a documentary depiction of what I wanted my life to be. But you're taking it further and saying, now, what if you, Mitch, at this moment, projected that stuff backwards into little Mitch? Hence, it creates a feeling of symmetry. And that symmetry may be a reflection of selection versus my tracking past to present, so to speak? And that's a wonderful question. I have no idea, but when we discover these symmetries, certainly it's a place to start digging. I mean, symmetries are disclosing something to us, it seems to me.
I love that, because if you can cast magic into the future, there would be no reason you couldn't cast magic in the past. I'm thinking about a study that
Sure.
Dean Radin referred to in Real Magic. I don't know if you've
Hmm.
read that book. It's an amazing book. But he talks about a study they did where they were praying for people in the hospital from 20 years ago, right? So they were praying for people who are sick in a hospital from 20 years ago, but they didn't realize that the people were in the past. They thought it was present.
Mm.
And all they had were I think the names of the people in the hospital, and the people who were prayed over did better in their outcomes and healed faster than the people who weren't prayed for. But the trick in the whole experiment was it was 30 or 40 years in the past that the people were in
The
the
initial
hospital.
illness that they
Yes.
experienced.
And so they were
Wow.
actually casting magic in the past and changing outcomes of the past, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, Dean does a lot of work in experimenting with precognition. And I know that in one of Dean's experiments, he has found that if you flash images before people of scenes that are emotionally affecting, whether they're disturbing in one way or arousing in another way, some of the associated physical responses, whether it's adrenal glands or sweat glands or something else, will kick in just milliseconds prior to the showing of the image, at least in a statistically significant number of cases. And yeah, it raises the whole question of what is any of this? What is time? What is going on? We even still, just because it's how we're trained to think, we think of, I mean, just the very word precognition, we think, oh, we're sort of traveling backwards, or the influence is traveling backwards and we're meeting it, or whatever it is, or we're able to see forwards. But it may be that all of this is part of one whole, and we're participating in ways that are constantly remaking everything, that's going on. We just sense it in a linear way.
I love it. It's so, I mean, we could talk about that for 2 more hours. It's fascinating.
So to speak, right?
Oh yeah, right. Or maybe we talked about it already.
Maybe
We've
we
already
did, right?
processed all of it. So I want to hear about your book. I want more information about the 13 miracle habits. And I saw on Instagram that you posted the 13. So I was like, oh, good. Now we can really, he's disclosed them, so we can talk about it a little
Right.
bit.
Oh, yeah. They're all disclosed. I just asked myself, what would be 13 things that we could perform fairly regularly that would produce what I consider to be extraordinary outcomes? Because again, I want people to be able to act on things that they can move on whatever emotional state they're in. So for example, one of the habits is get away from cruel people. And I think that is vitally important. And I firmly and strongly believe that human cruelty is not spoken of frequently enough, is not treated as such frequently enough. And, look, every one of us is diagnosable. Everything that we do is diagnosable. And there's a code that my insurance company can dutifully reject for everything that I manifest. Allowing for that fact, if somebody is behaving in a way that you, the individual, find tormenting, whether it's passive aggressive or gaslighting, and very often it is some sort of gaslighting, because cruelty conceals itself, and cruelty usually hides behind plausible denial. That's one of the ways that people are able to get away with it. You know what you're experiencing. You're mature enough to know what you're experiencing. If you're being tormented in that way, my counsel is, and one of those habits is, that you must get away from it. You must get away from it. And even if you can't get away from it because you have reasons, maybe economic reasons, why it's simply not possible, then you have to internally vow to separate from this person and get away from him or her as a physical fact at the soonest possible instant. And be real careful, scrutinize your life, because very often we say, but I can't separate from my mother-in-law or whatever it may be. There's a choice involved. The consequences may be too great to bear, but be really sure you understand that there is a choice involved. You may not like the consequences. There's always going to be consequences, including to passivity. But don't say can't. Don't say can't, because you can. You may have to evaluate the consequences and take a long, deep breath as to whether they are sustainable. But you have the ability.
I love that. It's number 6, right? Leave cruel people.
There,
I thought of
there you've got me, because I don't have them memorized, I'm afraid, but I can say there are 13. The only reason there are 13, by the way, is not because I'm, turned on by the number 13, or not because of that reason itself, but because that just seemed to me that the compelling points that I wanted to hit, they just happened to number 13.
I love that cruel people reminds me. I tell my clients often, it's not the words or the specific, it's the intention. Intention is everything. And if the
Yes,
intention
yeah.
is cruelty, you just can feel that in your body, right? You just know
Absolutely.
that.
And when you
So,
get
so
told, you're too sensitive or whatever, that's a perfect scent trail that you're around somebody cruel, because cruelty will always seek plausible denial, and do not listen to it.
I love that. I'm wondering, in something I listened to, an interview with you, you spoke eloquently about, and I think one of the 13 habits is about allowing things that are difficult to forge you into a more resilient person with depth, right? That you'll remain a child forever unless you go through hardship. And
Yes.
so there's this kind of edge, right? Where it's like, how long do you stay to try to work through something so that you're not super fragile and collapse at every hardship? How long do you stay with people like that? When do you know to leave? What is that edge where you're just like, this is enough? And it's not a challenge for me to grow into a bigger person or give me something to reflect on. This is really harmful, and I just need to walk.
Well, that's a rule that's entitled uh, "Opposition is friendship." It comes from a William Blake quote: "Opposition is true friendship." It's the idea, as you were alluding, that we only grow and become fortified through friction, basically. Otherwise, we would remain emotional and intellectual children, in the same way that resistance training tones the body. I mean, it just seems to be a natural law. We get fortified, we grow adaptable, we improve, we increase when we're faced with friction. Friction is the price of creativity. Friction is the price of being independent beings. I think life throws it at us so constantly that there's never a paucity of it. It's never unavailable. It's available constantly, always and everywhere. It doesn't mean we want to indulge in it, but sometimes the very act of problem solving that you're referencing, for example, getting away from a cruel person, that may be exactly the thing that we're being called upon to do. And everybody in our lives seems to have some role to play, whether or not we respond to it. I just put out a new Neville anthology called The Ideal Realized, and there's a talk that Neville gives in there, which I titled Even the Wicked. And he talks about how even the wicked have a role to play, a part to play, the thief or whomever, in the unfoldment of the individual's selectivity of what he or she needs, wants, desires, wishes in life. And so the idea is not to necessarily indulge the thief. It may be that the act of exposing the thief or getting away from the thief, it could be that that's exactly what the individual needs. But I am absolutely certain that we would remain children in every way if we didn't have to overcome friction, which is, of course, why I also want to be careful about revising my so-called past, because some of the traits that I most appreciate in myself, that I most admire in myself, and this is true for every one of us, may have been responses to a difficulty. Some of the areas in which we are most mature wouldn't have arisen if we hadn't faced trauma.
Absolutely. We're such meaning making creatures, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's all about the meaning that we put to it. And I feel like what I do as a therapist is help people reorient the meaning to their lives, the meaning to what has happened to them, with
Yes.
a sense of resiliency and purpose in that, right? That the hard
Yes.
things that we've gone through have made us a better person, a deeper person, a more compassionate person. And without that, I wouldn't be who I am today.
Yes.
I feel
Yes.
like the struggles that I've had in my own life have really helped me be a much better therapist with more empathy and compassion, right? And so I would, now looking back, I wouldn't change a single thing. Not that those things were okay, not that it was okay that the cruel people did what they did. And I'm so glad they're not in my life anymore. And it took a long time for me to put meaning to why those things happened to me. But once I did, that really forged me into a more resilient, aware, and compassionate person.
Yes, yes. I've also think back from time to time on things that I've done to people in the past that have been cruel, and I'm heartbroken by it, and I'm devastated by it, and sometimes it comes back to me with a particular meaning, and it's hard to digest that. You know, it's hard to digest that. I mean, we always think of ourselves as being the good guys, you know, and things were done unto us, unto me, you know, rather than my doing things to others, and I'm trying to work with that as well, because I think that a lot of times what we call abuse of power is, you know, comes through just the opportunity to abuse that power. You know, people who are persuaded that they would do things differently if they were sitting behind the big desk. They just haven't been behind the big desk. But, you know, we have to really scrutinize our lives and ask, you know, what am I made of? Because I certainly have done things to people that I look back upon that were cruel and that I'm absolutely heartbroken by, even if I could attribute them to immaturity or something else. But you know, how dare I not scrutinize those things in myself?
I appreciate that so much. I think about how hard it's easy. I mean, it's difficult, but it's easier to heal our inner victim than to heal and take accountability for our inner perpetrator.
Yeah,
Any of us that have been victimized have internalized both the abuse
absolutely.
and the abuser. We have an abuser part. We all internalize that somewhere within us. And so what does that look like to really explore that? It's really, really difficult to explore the ways that we've been cruel to others.
Yeah,
That's a harder task for sure.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what other habits do you feel like you want to talk about here?
Well,
13 habits.
habit number 13 is called rule in hell. And that is that it comes from John Milton's famous statement attributed to Lucifer that it's better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. I've certainly found that to be true. I have found that wherever I go, that I'm capable of charting my own course. I'm ultimately happier. I'm vastly more expressive. I learn more, I produce more, I feel better about myself, I'm more relaxed. You know, for a long time, it was very important to me to write on my topics for mainstream sources. And I had bylines, you name it, you know, I mean, I had bylines uh, quite recently in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, and I was very proud of writing about metaphysical topics in those places, which are not exactly founts of occult passion. And yet at a certain point, you know, I got tired of it, you know, even though it did give me something, it did. But I got tired of the restrictions. I got tired of the solicitations. I got tired of having to wait for the approbation of some mainstream figure who might not share my values or my outlook. And so I wouldn't say I would never do it again, but I haven't done it very much recently, nor have I pursued it, because I feel that I'm infinitely happier, infinitely more relaxed, more at ease, and a better artist, frankly, just being able to write within settings where I feel total freedom, even if they're not places that occupy a highly respected perch within the cultural hierarchy. I wouldn't be able to have written about any number of things that you and I have been discussing if I had limited myself to wanting to communicate within a very a kind of like culturally approved mainstream framework. That does give you certain things, or people wouldn't do it. But I found those things were falling short in terms of my search. And my search is everything to me. My search and my work are one and the same, or they're dead. So I find that ruling in hell, by which I mean charting your own course rather than living within the boundaries of someone else's designation, has just been hugely helpful to me. So that's the habit on which I end the book, and it's the culmination of a lot that I write about in the book.
I love that. That's so powerful. But I wonder, do you feel like you have to know the rules in order to break them? Do you feel like you had to dedicate that time playing in the mainstream culture in order to earn your status so that you could break out? Or do you recommend that people just, go balls out right from the beginning and just be who you are and not give a shit what anybody thinks? What do you think?
That's a great point. It depends what you want in life. I do think that experiment as an end to itself can just become a certain degree of indulgence. I do think that you have to have mastery over some set of essential abilities, or it doesn't matter whether you have a great point of view on how a power plant should be run. If you don't know how to run a power plant in the here and now and understand how turbines turn and what you need to do to get those turbines to turn, there's not much you can do as an engineer within a power plant. So yes, I do believe that garnering abilities is absolutely vital. I have been writing for many, many years, and I have worked so hard on my writing. I have dedicated literally countless hours to it. And I'm always asking someone, if they dream of doing something, have they been working on it? Life does require enormous amounts of sweat equity from us, whatever we do, whether you're an engineer or writer, or you play a sport, martial artist, whatever it may be. So actually, I think that one of the things I also write about in the Miracle Habits is that focus brings power. Focus brings power. Concentrating on something, rehearsing, practicing, drilling, doing it over and over and over and over. It's a natural law within our psyches, in as much as it's a natural law in the world itself. You could push air currents out of the way with your hand, but if you concentrate that air into one very sharp channel, it's a tremendous force. The same is true with our psyche. So we absolutely do need to, you do best that which you do most often. So mastery is a vital part of it.
I appreciate, yeah, it's this idea of learning how to have self-discipline, right? I'm thinking about all the hoops I had to jump through to become a therapist. So, it's such a square world of like 4 hours of multiple choice, taking the test,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
everything got me to this point of being able to offer, psychedelic assisted therapy to my clients, which was the goal, 20 years ago, right? But it took a lot of discipline to get here. And I'm sure the same for you, learning all about writing and interviewing and writing books and, making deadlines and all of those things that you had to learn to get to the place that you're at now.
Yeah, and I tell you, I really believe very deeply in sweat equity. I think, again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, that there's not really a division between all these things. Sometimes within the New Thought world, a world that I love, people will say, do you just think of it, or do you need to be doing things? And my feeling is there's not really a division there. If you're passionate about something, you're going to be working towards it. So, I only use writing as an example because it's my life, it's my work, but I can think of many nights, quite literally, where I would stay up all night working, or I might get only 2 hours of sleep. And that's not super healthy, but you can do it in the short term. I wouldn't recommend operating machinery when you're doing that, but you can do it. And I would steal time to write at all hours of the day and night. I remember long periods of time where I wouldn't drink or do any drugs or anything like that, because I just always needed to be ready to sit down at that keyboard and start working. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Making those, I could say they were sacrifices, but they didn't really feel like sacrifices. They felt like opportunities to be honing my art. I'm sure that anybody who's really dedicated to something, whether it's a martial artist or a musician or an engineer or whatever, I would think that he or she just absolutely relishes those opportunities to practice the craft.
Yeah, I love that. And you also, in one of the habits is taking care of your body and becoming physically strong, which I appreciate too.
Yeah,
The vessel that you're in, you want to have that vessel be able to rock your world and show up and be healthy and focused, right?
absolutely. It's very important. That section was informed once by something that a friend of mine said to me, that if you don't give something its proper attention right now, it will take all of your attention later. And that's a general rule. We all have things that we have to pay attention to, whether relationships or finances. but that's true of the body as well. And so if you don't take care of your body now, it's going to take all your attention later to fix things that are wrong. I also personally happen to believe that physical strength and stamina, resistance training are just extremely good for your body and psyche in all kinds of ways. And I talk about the experience in that chapter of the punk rock artist Henry Rollins, who's somebody that I really admire. In fact, I have a tattoo of Henry's band Black Flag here. And Henry said that when he was an adolescent, he was growing up impoverished in a suburb outside of Washington, D.C., and he was extremely unhappy. And he started weightlifting, and it changed his life entirely. And I would ask people really, truly listen to that, whatever age you are, wherever you're at in life. Simple things can make such a tremendous difference if you dedicate yourself to them. Don't think of weightlifting as something that, well, you know, that's vain or that's cosmetic or whatever. It's many things. It's many things, and that could be very helpful to you. It could revolutionize your whole life. So I really believe, I truly believe in my heart in paying attention to ordinary things. If you dedicate yourself to them and you apply them, you may discover profundity, but only in application.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. I learned how to box 5 years ago, and it's completely transformed my life, not just my physical body, but all of these ways of offense, defense, how to take up space, how not to back down. So there's so many facets to physical fitness that are beyond the aesthetic, you know, or just the way you look, or even just health. There's psychological components to it too.
Absolutely. And of course, the aesthetic is important too. You know, I mean, we all are different beings made up in different ways, but I would say that, you know, the experience of beauty has been a part of every culture, the Maya, the Aztec, the Greek, the Roman, the Egyptian, you know, you name it. And that doesn't, I'm not trying to describe some narrowly prescribed sense of beauty, but that which is beauty is a vital part of life. So I never make the statement of something just being, you know, cosmetic or superficial or whatever. It's like, it's life. These are the lives we lead.
I love it. So tell us about how people can find you, where to get your book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. The new book, The Miracle Habits, is up on a struggling little startup called Amazon, and you can buy it there or anywhere you like in this world. And my website is mitchhorowitz.com. I'm on Twitter at Mitch Horowitz, on Instagram at Mitch Horowitz23. And Twitter and Instagram are a good way to stay in touch because I post new projects there. And my website has lots of videos and other things that people may find interesting.
Yeah, I definitely recommend listening to your podcast or watching you speak. They're really wonderful.
Thank you.
Look them up. Yeah. Thanks so much, Mitch.
Pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.